Tasha Bennings looked around. There was nothing for miles, with not a single sign of life to be found. Great. Just great. She was supposed to be heading home, but she decided to take the back roads rather than the main highway, which was a huge mistake. Work went late. The show went well, and she made some great sales. Tasha rode off that high when she got in the car, excited for her business to be taking off. After she left her full-time job to be an artist, it hadn't been easy. The hours were long, and the payoff was lacking, to say the least. With this fare, she managed to finally make her dreams a reality and slowly work towards financial freedom. That was until the sound of the engine sputtering closed off those dreams. Her car slowly rolled in neutral until it stopped completely. She tried to turn it back on again, but no dice. Not even the dash turned on. Could it be the battery? No, I recently changed it. Tasha left the car and went outside to check the hood, only to find smoke pouring out from the interior. That wasn't good. She stared at the contents, frustration brewing inside of her. She just wanted to get home. Tasha checked the radiator and also checked the coolant, but no dice. Everything was off. She tried to see if she could change any of the fluid, but nothing worked. With a resigned sigh, she looks around. The lingering fear of being outside, all alone with not a soul to help, worried her. It was late at night. She left the fairgrounds late because she spent some time talking with another artist exchange of ideas. What was supposed to be an exciting time turned out to be a living nightmare, one only fueled by the lingering reality that she had no way around. She looked around, and soon, the features of the background came to light. It wasn't the middle of nowhere, but rather a neighborhood filled with ritzy, upscale houses. She recognized the place instantly. It was Ivy Grove, one of the richest communities in her area. She took this way because the back roads from the fairgrounds went to her. The GPS mentioned that if she took the highway, it would take another 30 minutes to get home. All she wanted was to go home and see her husband, Ryan. He mentioned he had dinner ready for her, and she was so excited to tell him about her day. But instead, the crushing reality of a car broken down definitely ruined all chances. Sighing, she looked around for someone, anyone at all. All she saw around were nice houses. Many of them were worth millions of dollars. That was the reality of Ivy Grove. It was a beautiful, upscale community with many rich people who loved to flaunt their wealth. They all had rotten personalities, too, many of them vain and unhelpful. This only served to make her discontent more apparent, for she wanted nothing more than to get out of here. Let me see if my phone still has some juice. She walked to the front car door again and grabbed her phone from the console. Right as she swiped the screen to see the image of her and her husband on her wedding day, the screen went black. She tried and tried again, but every press of her purple manicured nail led to nothing. Sighing, she put the phone back in the console. Just my luck. Tasha looked around the car for any sign of a phone charger. She thought she kept one in here, but in the chaos of selling her wares, she left it at home, much to her dismay. Even the spare that she usually kept in here was fade and torn. With the car turned off, there was no way to charge it either. She also tried to find the power bank that she usually kept on. Sadly, every venture led to no such luck. The panic grew, festering into a growing, nagging wound, making her worried for her own safety. Sure, it was a nice neighborhood, but it made her feel ill at ease, like she didn't belong. Each second felt like the chiming of the clock, and the panic in her body grew with the possibility of just how bad things might go. She closed her eyes and took a few deep breaths. Okay, maybe there's some way for me to get to someone's house and ask them for help. She looked at each of the houses, only to find the gates that surrounded them. Like large metal structures of imposing natures, It kept her away, and she was unable to get inside. If she wanted to, she would have to wake them up, and she didn't want to intrude on others. It was not a bad day or anything. The night was cool and a little crisp, but there was no rain or anything in the forecast. At least with the weather being nice, she wasn't totally suffering while being stranded. A small smile crept to her face as she thought about that. Still, she was determined not to give up. There had to be someone around here. She first looked around her car once more and also checked the back. She removed all of her auto tools for the cartons of various items she crocheted, and a small smile crossed her face. At least she sold everything, but now those containers all took up space and provided no help for the current predicament. Tasha sighed as she realized it was time to move away from there. Perhaps there was someone outside, preferably a nice individual, who would at least hear her out and humor her requests. She left her car and walked down the street, and as she drew closer, she noticed the cars looked even more out of place. Almost all of them were behind the gates or in the garages. An eerie sensation washed over her, and her hand reached down to touch her legs. She kept her hands to her side with each step. As she looked around, the uneasy feeling returned, along with the feeling that she wasn't alone. Please, anyone, I need your help. Tasha continued to look around until she saw something in the distance. At first, she thought that it might be a mirage, but as she took a few more steps closer, her excitement grew stronger. It was a person, a police officer at that. She walked a little bit faster, her breath growing ragged as she rushed over. Please don't leave before I get there. I need your help. Tasha treated this car as her final chance and the final option she had to survive this place. Tasha got closer, only to find a pair of piercing blue eyes and a head of red hair slicked back. He stared at her derisively, and Tasha managed a smile, but deep down, she knew something was wrong. She couldn't explain it or put her finger on it, but it was apparent. Officer Ryan looked forward, bored out of his mind. It was so late already. There's nothing to do right now. He yawned and checked the clock. It was almost midnight, just a few more hours left of this shift. He groaned, annoyed that he decided to take the overnight shift running security around Ivy Grove. Oh well, they do pay nice when they ask for us to run security. He couldn't complain too much. The worst that would happen was someone's alarm falsely went off, and then he'd have to go over there and reassure them that it was a squirrel. Officer Ryan and those who worked in his department liked to make sure that these areas were properly kept aligned and the riffraff was kept out. Officer Ryan turned on the police scanner. The sound of the other officers hummed through the air. Not much happened on nights like this. It wasn't like he worked in Jackson Square where some of those other types of people worked. The place was crime-ridden, which made sense with the number of black people congregating there. It opened the door to that sort of thing. Not like the people around Ivy Grove would ever cause crimes like that. Bored out of his mind, Officer Ryan glanced up, expecting to see absolutely nothing. What came next was something completely unexpected. What is she doing here? She doesn't belong around these parts. Officer Ryan stared, already annoyed that he had even laid eyes on someone like this. She definitely was not from a part of this area. Her curvy frame grew closer, and her purple nails looked like big talons. The pink suit she wore was like a huge beacon and looked almost unsettling. The woman would be like a big old flamingo if she didn't have charcoal ashy skin. Already Officer Ryan wanted to drive off, but she stood right in the way with her arms flailed. She got a bit closer until she stopped, catching her breath as she looked up at Officer Ryan. This was going to be a long night, he thought, ready to leave. He didn't have to help this woman, nor did he want to. She didn't belong here, and he sure as hell didn't get paid to help women like this. It's more like keeping people like her kind out and away from these houses. Tasha looked at the officer like he was the beacon of light she'd been looking for. An excited, exuberant smile of relief flashed across her face. "Hi there. I'm sorry to bother you." "You are bothering me," the man muttered. "I'm busy." He glanced down at the police scanner in hopes that maybe he would get something on the radio to get him away from this. He didn't have to help her. The woman probably wanted something from him. Tasha looked at him, completely taken aback by his words. "I'm sorry." "You're not supposed to be here, lady. Perhaps the houses and the fact that this is a private neighborhood wasn't enough. You know that I can arrest you for that alone." Tasha stood there, completely shocked at the man's words. Why wouldn't he help? She knew Ivy Grove was a private complex filled with some of the most influential people in town, but she thought they'd at least have a little more care towards her. Now she had an officer who seemed frustrated with even helping her. He reached down to roll up the window, but then Tasha spoke. "I know, but I need some help. Please, my car broke down and I'm stranded. I need some help." Like that's my problem, Officer Ryan thought. He wasn't some kind of charity case that would sit there and help someone. He's a man with a job to survey areas for trouble. And right now, if she isn't careful, he'll arrest her for that trouble. "I can't help." That was a load of crock. Tasha kept her composure, but she felt the lingering gaze, one filled with pure, unadulterated disdain, as he leveled this towards her. "Please, you can. I'm sorry, I need some help. I just don't have many other options," she explained. "And I'm supposed to do what?" Officer Ryan grew progressively more frustrated at her words. Being a police officer didn't mean he had to play charity with every person that came his way, especially someone like her. "You've got the wrong officer. The square is a few miles away. Maybe they can help you there." She shook her head. She knew where the square was. The walk would take hours, and by then, it would be too late to get help. Tasha couldn't believe this. The man didn't seem to care at all about her issues. "That's miles away. I don't have a car. Please, if I can just use your phone." "No," he said coldly. "You cannot." His curt and cold voice cut through the air. He smirked, enjoying the flustered response. Officer Ryan enjoyed using his position of authority, sometimes to his advantage, and other times to make the other people around him know their place. This was one of those instances. When it came to this woman, she treated him like some kind of charity case, not as a person. He wanted nothing to do with this and would rather park near another block and listen to his police scanner. Tasha's heart began to race. She felt the anger inside, but knew getting upset with an officer was not a good idea, even if he was cold and rude. "Why not? I promise that once I just get some help, I'll leave you out of your hair." "Oh, so I'm supposed to just drop everything and help some random fool who walked through the wrong neighborhood? Let me guess, you're trying to figure out the best way to get into places like this?" "Not at all," Tasha said, completely perplexed at what the man was implying. Was he trying to say, "I'm here to steal from these people"? Tasha had a job that she loved, and she always prided herself on having upstanding morals. "I just got back in town and the engine stalled. It seems like it's dead. I tried to look at the engine, but it was impossible to see in the dark." The officer stared at her. He didn't say anything for a good minute, and instead just frowned. This woman couldn't be serious. Suspicion filled Officer Ryan's head as he listened to her pleas. "Just what are you doing out here then? The highway's much further away. It would have been quicker for you to take home." "I was planning on doing it, but I wanted to take it this way as there was traffic GPS warned me about," Tasha quietly explained. She would have taken I in a heartbeat if she didn't see it would have taken an extra 30 minutes due to an accident. Now she began to wonder if the highway would have been the better option, given the man's garbage responses. Officer Ryan looked at her and sized her up and down, sneering at her. She looked like trouble, like she was waiting for the one moment he didn't pay attention. From there, she would probably steal something from these places or check out the cars here. You should probably take that instead of joyriding through people's neighborhoods. Someone like you looks suspicious around here, he spat. The tone was like whiplash to Tasha. She thought officers were supposed to help. Instead, the man, whom she learned from the name tag Officer Ryan, seemed almost hateful with her being there. She didn't know what to do other than to continue to beg in hopes that, for a second, he would have a heart. Given the man's track record, however, it seemed a heart was the last thing the man had. "Please, I'm sorry. Can you please help me?" "Why don't you call a tow truck? Or maybe you don't know what those are." "Of course, now I know those are," she replied, laughing nervously in an attempt to diffuse the already tense air. He thought she was stupid. Then why not? "Because my phone's dead," she explained again. "I would call a tow truck if I could. Maybe then I'd be out of here," she stated. The tow truck would also be a better option, given how Officer Ryan seemed to be as helpless as ever. However, Officer Ryan's cold eyes continued to stare at her, like she was a criminal, with a narrowed, deadpanned look. "You don't believe me." Officer Ryan didn't have to answer that. In fact, he could just drive away right now and not take any responsibility. Looking over at the other houses, he shrugged. "Well, I'm not saying that it's weird that you haven't," he retorted. "Or at least talk to someone around here who might be able to help you." Tasha would have, if she had an option. In fact, if she could get a hold of anyone, then she wouldn't even be in this type of mess. Sighing, Tasha took a deep breath as she felt the beady eyes focus on her, and his lips curled into a sneer. "I haven't because I don't have the resources. Like I told you, I don't have a phone." "Oh, but I bet you like to be in neighborhoods like this," he muttered. She probably felt at home because she could go through their yards, steal their stuff, and get away with it. She sensed what Officer Ryan was thinking, and it wasn't good. He probably assumed that she liked to stalk these places when, in truth, she never came through Ivy Grove until tonight. "Not at all," she admitted. In fact, Tasha would have never stopped here at all. She regretted not taking the highway now, especially with the cold, calculating nature of a guy like him. "I just took the way my GPS told me." "Where's the GPS now?" he asked. His accusatory voice was clearly directed at her rather than the situation at hand. "I don't have it. My phone is dead," she replied for the third time, hoping that this time he would listen. Officer Ryan stared at her, unfazed by her words. Part of her wondered why she even tried to reason with this guy since he already had his own bias. Frustrated, she sighed. "Listen, I'm really not trying to make your life hard, officer, but please help. I just need a phone so I can call my husband and then I'll get out of your hair." "I don't have one of those," he muttered dismissively. He would never let a woman like her use it. Tasha, however, spotted the phone instantly, sitting in the small holder next to the dash. "What's that then?" "Something you don't need to use," he spat. Officer Ryan leaned forward and looked at Tasha up and down. He grew tired of this. If she was going to sit here and argue with him for the rest of the night, then Officer Ryan planned to shut her up one way or another. "Listen, lady, your kind does not belong in these neighborhoods. And I'm suggesting that right now, if you know what's good for you, you get out of here. These people will eat you alive, and I don't get paid enough to handle requests like yours." "Eat me alive? Do I need to spell it out for you? You're trespassing, and if one of them decides to take legal action, I'm under no obligation to help you. In fact, I don't need to right now. Why don't you want to help me?" He smirked, but to Tasha it looked much more like an animal snarling, almost like a rabid monster. Because I don't like your kind." The words were biting, and Tasha felt the tears of frustration prickle against her eyes. She took a deep breath and nodded. "Fair. I understand. I know I don't belong here. I just thought that you might be able to help." That was all she asked for. If she just got a little bit of help, she'd be able to call her husband and he'd come over. But it felt like Officer Ryan got off to make her life harder, like this was some kind of a game for him. It might as well be, considering he was a bored cop in a neighborhood where they probably paid him thousands just to roam around and make sure nobody's pets got out. "Well, I don't. In fact, you'd best get out of my face. I'm not going to until I get some help." Tasha sighed, trying to figure out what to say next. "I know this isn't what you wanted to deal with tonight. Believe me, I didn't. Dealing with some idiot who can't keep her phone charged, who doesn't belong in places like this. I don't want anything to do with this," he said. "I know, but please help me." "Can't help." "But, officer, you have a phone right there. Mine's dead. I just need it for a moment so I can call my husband to come pick me up." Every time she begged, he gave her the same unfazed stare, as if she were speaking to a brick wall. The anxiety flushed through her, looming over her like a rain cloud. Tasha struggled to keep her composure together. It was like the guy was trying to get her to break down. She took a few more breaths, and the silence that filled the room was enough to kill a person. "Please, just 5 minutes. Give me enough time to call my man and help me get out of here." Tasha struggled with panic disorders, and she felt a panic attack coming along, especially with how she was being treated. She opened her mouth in another attempt to form words. Officer Ryan looked her up and down. She looked like a rat or maybe a fish out of water. The woman didn't belong here. She belonged in a place that was more fitting for her kind, not the upper middle class. Sighing, he rolled his eyes. "Lady, I'm not paid enough to deal with this. Besides, I think you can get help from someone a little more fitting for you somewhere else. Go a few blocks over." "You're right here," Tasha explained. "I'm sorry, but I'm really scared. You're supposed to be an officer, someone to help me. Why won't you?" "Because despite the badge, I'm not obligated to help everyone." Officer Ryan had been with the department for 5 years. He learned plenty of times the hard way of stepping in and helping riffraff like this. "I have my reasons, and clearly you can ask someone else around here." "I don't have anyone," she exclaimed. "My husband's a couple of towns over." "Bet he's out there stealing something." "That's not my problem," he grunted. Officer Ryan knew this type. The ones who would spend their entire rent on hair weaves and nails, and then not have enough for basic needs. He didn't trust this woman either. She had that feel to her that if he stepped out, she might attack him. Tasha stood there and bit her lip. Officer Ryan wasn't hearing the half of it. With a sigh, she shook her head. "Listen, all I need is a phone to call my husband." "And then you're going to steal it later?" Tasha's eyes widened, the shock of the words cutting through her. "Excuse me? You've got it all wrong. I just want to call my husband. My phone died ages ago, and the nearest store is a few miles out." It would take her an hour to get there, and then she'd have to hope that they weren't closed. With the exception of gas stations and convenience stores, chances were that they had already shut down for the night. "Sorry, not my issue. Go ask someone else." "But, sir..." Tasha raised her voice in hopes that he'd hear her plea, but to no avail. Officer Ryan was tired of this. He wasn't paid to help her, just to patrol around. Turning on the car, he drove away before Tasha could utter another word. "I can't believe this." A combination of both anger and fear resonated throughout all of Tasha's body. She thought that an officer of the law would be more helpful. Now, here she was, in a neighborhood she wasn't totally familiar with, stranded, without a single possible way to get out of here. Tears filled Tasha's eyes as she watched the cop car drive away. She was treated unfairly. The guy assumed so much. His racist, crude remarks chilled her to the bone, and it made her realize that people were still just as hateful as ever. The panic attack finally came forth like a crushing wave. She clutched her chest, her breathing in labored sounds. "No, please, someone help me." She reached forward and touched one of the fences as she struggled to keep it together. Her heart raced like a race car as tears streamed down her face. Why won't he listen? Is it because she was a black woman? It couldn't be just that, right? The hateful face bored right into her mind, however, and the answer was apparent. He dated her for that reason alone, and made it very clear he wanted to have nothing to do with her. How he got his badge was beyond her. Finally, after a few minutes, her heart rate and breathing slowed. She managed to take a couple of deep breaths in between the wheezes. Tasha then used the mantra she used whenever she had a panic attack, one that helped keep her grounded throughout the stress of the situation. "Calm down, Tosh. You'll find something. Just relax," she told herself. It was a mantra she used to feel better, but it did little to ease the aching mind. In her head, she was frustrated and pissed as could be. How could a guy like him even work in a force like that? She thought police officers were supposed to help, even if they weren't fully obligated to. If she wasn't black, would he have acted differently? The answer was apparent, and it upset Tasha even more. Now what? Tasha looked about. Nobody was around. Ivy Grove was just as dead as it was when she got her. She wondered if anyone had heard her and the officer arguing. Then again, maybe they stayed away because they knew better than to get involved in a situation like this. Or maybe they were just as racist as the cop, not interested in helping other people, and, of course, treating them differently because of their own prejudice. The vibe of the people here screamed they preferred to mind their own business. She wished that with this there was at least one nice person. But, from the way the place looked, that was impossible. All of the gates had codes on them, and very few had intercoms. It was like a prison. Such a contrast from her modest ranch house, but then again, perhaps the modesty was what made it night. Another thing Tasha noticed was that all of the gates also had cameras and infrared lasers in a few of the backyards. The last thing she wanted to do was go into one of those, especially with the welcome party looking far from accepting. Sighing, she got up and started to walk back to her car. The leaves blew through the air and her feet crunched over a few of them. It was getting cold. She walked back to the car and closed the door, shivering slightly. This was worse than she thought. She was stuck out here, and it was after midnight. In a place like this, it was rare for anyone to show up after a certain point. Maybe in the morning she could find something, but for now, she had to keep it together. Officer Ryan didn't bother to look back as he drove down the next street. "She'll be fine. It's not my job to step out and help every person that comes their way," he scoffed. Officer Ryan had one job, and that was to make sure that not a single intruder came into the area. If there were any funny business, he'd report it instantly. Maybe I should go back and report her. Nah, that would mean I'd have to take her in, and that's the last thing I feel like doing right now. A smug smile crept to his lips as he realized he had the power. He worked hard to establish a perfect reputation as one of the top officers in the precinct. While his methods were controversial, to say the least, Officer Ryan was happy to have been awarded Officer of the Month for the last 3 months. His squeaky clean record set him up for a promotion at the end of the month. That promotion would be enough to put a down payment on the house he wanted to get with his fiancée. Just a few more shifts, and from there, I'll be scot-free. He just had to make it through this and make sure that the woman didn't do anything to jeopardize those chances. Tasha looked around. The temperature dropped and a chill coursed through her body. She shivered, covering her arms across her chest as she looked around. Where to now? Is there anyone who could help me? Officer Ryan was out of the question. Not that he bothered to come back. After being the smuggest jerk known to man, he drove off. No other cars were around, and there were even fewer people. Tasha was left with only one choice: to go back to her car and pray that someone, anyone at that, would come around and help her. So she did. She went to her car, feeling the cold rush through her body once again. It's not supposed to drop below freezing tonight, right? The worry that Tasha might become a human popsicle because of that officer's crude actions didn't sit well with her. What if it did get cold and she suffered out here? Would he care? The answer was obvious. He didn't care. He was selfish and rude as could be. Officer Ryan glanced at the dash and noticed it was cold. A frost was coming in tonight, and it would damage the plants that weren't properly covered in the yards around him. It wasn't my problem. Officer Ryan had a perfectly cushy job, and it wasn't his problem if these fools messed up their plants. Just like it wasn't his fault that the woman didn't take care of her car. Maybe if she spent less on her weave and more on the parts of the car, she wouldn't be in that mess. Officer Ryan smiled and then grabbed the wheel again before driving down to the next set of houses. For another hour, Tasha waited. At this point, the place felt even deader than before. The cold temperatures seeped in, and all Tasha could use was the Afghan blanket she brought with her to display the items she had. It served, but she wished it were something else. Someone, anyone, please help me. The growing fear and frustration, coupled with the anger of mistreatment, compounded inside her. Part of her wished she had recorded it. The evidence of a police officer acting that way would not sit well with the rest of the department. She didn't see a body cam on him, though, and her phone, long dead, would be useless. Nobody saw the actions. At least, that's what she thought. Tasha tried to find something to focus on. The joy of her sales was forgotten, replaced by the lingering dread of getting home. She tried to close her eyes, if only for a few minutes, but she couldn't even do that. The houses around her stared at her, conveying the feeling that she'd experienced all this time, that she didn't belong here, and that she should leave. Shuddering, Tasha looked into the distance, in the direction where her husband was. Michael, I need you now. I miss you and I'm scared. The feeling of helplessness only grew with each second, and how she was all alone, in a place where she felt more ostracized than before. Her eyes grew heavy, and soon it became hard to stay away. The stress of a long day, along with the stress prior to the show, caught up with her. Sleep eventually took over, but it was only for a brief moment. Bright lights flashed right in front of her, nearly blinding her. Is that a person? She quickly got out of the car, determined to go see the individual. She raises her hand, almost standing in the middle of the road. The person stopped and then killed their engine. After they dimmed the lights, the windows rolled down. A pair of olive green eyes looked at Tasha. It was a girl, probably in her early 20s, with red hair. She looked at Tasha's car and then at her. Next to the young girl was a dog, a terrier mix that barked as he joined her on her lap at the window. "Are you okay, miss?" the girl asked, the slight twang of a southern drawl apparent in her voice. She rolled the window down a bit further and rested her arms there. Tasha, hesitant about this stranger being her savior, shook her head. "No, but I'm not sure you'll be able to help." The last thing Tasha wanted to do was get someone else involved. Plus, she feared that the woman might have the same response to her that the lovely officer did. The woman laughed, a sweet, dulcet sound that had no animosity to it. "I think I can. Are you stuck?" Tasha, unable to hide it away, nodded. "Yes, I'm stuck, and my phone's dead. I can't call my husband and—" Tasha cried before she could stop herself. All the frustration and fear that she felt suddenly dissipated as she looked at the woman in hopes that she would help. "I'm sorry. I don't know what came over myself," Tasha finally said as she wiped away the tears. "It's all right. I know how scary it can be for a woman all alone," the lady said. "Let's go down here in front of my place, and then you can use my phone to call your husband. You can use my charger too if he's not available to call a tow truck." Tasha felt as if she had met her savior with the woman's kind words. All the lack of help and frustration she felt before this was long forgotten, replaced by pure relief. "Thank you," she whispered, wiping the tears away. "Of course. Tell you what, if y'all need anything from your car, feel free to get it and throw it in the back of mine. Then we can head over together." "Okay. I don't have much. I worked at an art fair today and sold off pretty much anything." The woman's eyes widened and a smile crossed her face. "Amazing. Happy for you. By the way, I'm Bianca." "Tasha," she said, feeling better about the whole mess. Even though she barely knew Bianca and felt pathetic for suddenly throwing herself onto this person, it brought her relief. There were some good people in the world. You just had to look for them. The woman unlocked the car and urged Tasha to get in the back seat. Tasha looked around the car a couple more times, only taking the important valuables along with a couple of small art pieces. Now she was glad she sold everything at the airfare after doing one last once-over. Tasha got in the passenger seat, and the little terrier plopped right on her lap. "Don't mind Porky, he's a bit of a love bug." "Totally fine. I have dogs." Tasha couldn't wait to get home to her two Great Danes. Normally, Tasha took them with her to these art fairs, but because of the regulations and how cramped the car was, it wasn't possible. She left the pooches to stay with her aunt, who loves dogs more than she does people. "Ready to go?" Bianca asked, and Tasha nodded. "Born ready. And I can try to talk to a mechanic if you want it. My father got connections, and I'll make sure they don't tow your car," Bianca reassured. "Thank you," Tasha replied, relieved that Bianca would do that. "I was worried that someone might do it, even though it's not there, because I want it to be." "Oh, they will," Bianca replied as she rolled her eyes. "That's just how the place is. I've explained to my dad and a few others plenty of times that people don't just drive down here for fun and giggles. But you know how it is." "More than you know," Tasha thought to herself. The woman drove down the first block of Ivy Grove until they reached one of the driveways with a small gate. She parked right outside and then handed Tasha her phone. "Here, give him a call." Tasha nodded and dialed her husband's number. 2 rings later, she heard her husband's gruff voice, which brought relief to her. The memories of the racist cop were forgotten. For a moment. "Hey, babe. My car broke down and I had no way of getting home. I'm borrowing a Good Samaritan's phone to call you." "Yes, I'm safe and all right. I'm in Ivy Grove on Jackson Street, 125 Jackson Street," Tasha said as she read the address on the gilded placard above the house. "All right, I'll wait. Thank you, babe. I'm sorry for this to happen." "Oh, that's right. You're off your shift around this time. Very well." She heard the frustrated sounds on the other side. Tasha knew it wasn't easy for him, but she appreciated his words. "I love you too, baby. I'll see you soon." As soon as Tasha heard her husband's voice, she hung up and sighed, feeling both fear and relief. Bianca looked at her and smiled. "Get a hold of him?" "Sure did. Thanks so much. I tried to ask the patrol cop around here, but he refused to help. I'm sorry about that." she said, looking around the place. "That's just kind of how this neighborhood is. My parents are going to flip when they see what I'm doing, but I can't just leave someone stranded." "I appreciate it. You have a kind heart, Bianca. I don't want to keep you too late, though." "You're fine. I do have classes in the morning, so I'm not totally sure how long I can be out here." Tasha shook her head. "Listen, if you need to go in, I can take care of myself. I know my husband's coming." "True. But do you want to at least charge your phone for a few minutes? This is one of those lightning chargers, so it will give it enough juice for about an hour." Tasha grabbed the cord and sighed. "As much as I would take you up on this offer, I have an iPhone." "Ah, one of the older models. Still one of the dumbest business choices. Believe me, I hate it. I was hoping to get an upgrade with the money I made here, but that might be out of the question." Maybe worth a shot. If you need a mechanic, my dad knows people." "Thank you." Tasha stepped out of the car and grabbed the essentials she brought with her. Before she closed the door, Bianca spoke. "And don't mind the officer here. The guy's got the biggest stick up his butt. I think he only works here because my parents pay him or some crap." "Makes sense," Tasha sighed. "I'll try not to get to me." "Of course. See you." Bianca waved and then opened the gate. She drove inside and Tasha smiled. "I at least told Michael where I was." This place was a good 45 minutes away, but Tasha could wait. Still, she hated that it was all like this. She sat on the curb and waited. Silence filled the neighborhood. Nothing else stirred. Bianca and Porky were long inside. Tasha hated that she got stuck in this neighborhood of all places, but at least there was one person who helped her. She couldn't say the same about Officer Ryan, but at least she could rely on some good people. Still, now came the frustrating part, waiting and playing the waiting game until her husband showed up. Time passed, and Tasha watched the street. Nothing went on. It felt like 10 years, even though she knew it had only been 10 minutes. Officer Ryan, meanwhile, had finished the first round of patrols for the area. There was nothing amiss. Well, other than that woman who needed help. Seriously, did he look like a charity? Officer Ryan had no desire to help others, especially someone like that. He read on reports from other officers that people would say they needed help, and then their cars would get jacked or their money was stolen. Officer Ryan was too damn close to a promotion to let that sort of thing slide. If that meant she'd have to find another source of help, then so be it. Officer Ryan turned to the right and then made his way back. He parked at the end of the street and sighed, turning the radio on. So far, nothing from the rest of the guys from the other precinct. Officer Ryan looked down at his phone. It was a message from his guy, who helped him take care of the videos every shift. "Do you need me to scrub your cams? I'll be around tonight." A smile crept to his face. He sure did. The last thing he wanted was for that interaction to get out. He'd worked so hard to keep the perfect reputation. He and the rest of the department. Not even the higher-ups noticed. Smirking, he turned and headed towards the first street again. Tasha sighed and looked forward. The streetlights were all on, and each cast a hazy glow, which did little to relax her racing mind. "Where are you, Michael? You should be here by now." He probably drove as fast as he could, but that did little to ease her worry. What Tasha wanted was to get away from this place, to get away from Ryan. At least he gave up on harassing me for now. Though the silence did little to make her feel relaxed and had her looking around her shoulder. At least she didn't have some young cop with too much time on his hands bothering her because of a situation that was beyond her control. "I wish I could report him, but nobody will believe me. There's no evidence." With a sigh, Tasha nodded to herself. The best thing she could do was get out of here and put this all behind her. Suddenly, she saw a car. It's Michael, right? The excitement she felt quickly dissipated when she saw the man driving the car. Officer Ryan from before. He stopped right in front of her and rolled down the windows. You're still here? I thought my warning would have been enough to scare you off. Was this guy serious? The panic Tasha felt earlier lingered, but the anger she felt inside as she stared at the man grew. Officer Ryan found this funny, like she was some kind of sideshow. I would have left sooner if you had helped me. It's not my job. You made that perfectly clear, she muttered but looked away. He killed the engine and stepped out. Officer Ryan folded his arms across his chest and looked down at her. You do realize you're trespassing, correct? Trespassing? But she was on a public street. I can sit on the sidewalk while I wait for my ride, right? Sure, but that is private property. And I got a call from the owner of the place. He mentioned there was a suspicious individual sitting on the sidewalk. Tasha tensed up. She wondered how long it had been. Now, the officer was giving her a hard time because she wanted to sit down. Please, I'm just waiting for my husband. You're better off waiting somewhere else. Then again, not like you would keep your hands to yourself there either. She stood up and looked him in the eyes. The guy was one of those officers she couldn't stand. He was smug and acted as if his badge didn't entitle him to fulfilling his duty as an officer of the law. You could have helped me. I don't need to help your kind. You'd probably try to take something from me. Not at all, she admitted. Why do you think I'd do that? That's just plain wrong. The guy helped prejudiced beliefs, which seemed to not stop, even with her asking these pointed questions. So you're saying you're getting help? Yes. He's coming. Bet he's going to check out this neighborhood. All the more reason for me to stick around. Gotta make sure you all leave quietly. Tasha couldn't believe this man. He assumed that she was going to steal. She'd never stolen anything in her life, and her husband was one of the most morally upstanding men. You don't have to do that at all, officer. Yes, I do. I have a duty. You say this, but your badge conveys something else. A feeling of power and a skewed sense of superiority that you seem to ride the coattails of. Officer Ryan frowned. He took a few more steps until his towering frame hung over her. Tasha could smell the cigarettes on his suit. What did you say? Are you talking back to an officer? Not at all, she said. The powerless and fear came back with a vengeance. I'm just trying to make light of why you treat me this way. He cocked an brow and smiled, that same smug energy that seemed to not go away. I don't owe you an explanation. I have a job to do, and I need to make sure that certain people don't get in my way. Officer Ryan knew better than to trust her. The fact that it had been well over an hour and she still hadn't left was as suspicious as could be. He was under no obligation to help her, but by this point, the only thing left should be her car. He planned to write a ticket after she left the scene for a parking violation. That will teach her not to come to these parts. The two of them gazed at one another. Tasha felt like a mouse under this penetrative gaze. As for Officer Ryan, he enjoyed the feeling of power. Besides, it's not like the person picking her up would have any semblance of power whatsoever. Officer Ryan was used to people like this, the ones who would make excuse after excuse, claiming that they were good people and that they did no wrong. But he could smell it directly on them, and he sensed it from the moment he saw her. She was a ruffian. You're not going to get away with this. What? Not helping you? Because I am. I've done it once. I can do it again. Officer Ryan was one of the good boys from his department. He only helped the morally upstanding, just like his colleagues. With so many new changes to the department and a push for inclusivity, Officer Ryan wanted nothing to do with it. In fact, if it were up to him, he would only work with the good boys of his office. These guys made sure to pin the crimes on those who caused trouble, especially the black people who were in the community. Officer Ryan worked out here in Ivy Grove because he knew that these people didn't tolerate that kind of thing. With this woman here, it was clear that she was intrigued by a space that didn't belong to her, and he wanted to make sure she didn't feel welcome. Besides, he only helped those who deserved it. From what he gathered, this loudmouth far from deserved his assistance. Tasha felt defeated. Officer Ryan was trying to get a rise out of her, and it was harder and harder for her to hold back. Every second she was met with, the smug, dismissive stare made her wish that her husband could just materialize out of nowhere at this point. If he did that, then she'd feel safe. "So, where's your ride? He should be here by now." "He's coming. He's just on the other side of town," Tasha surmised. "Really? I think you're lying. I bet you don't have a ride. You're waiting for me to leave so that you can cause trouble or steal some money." Bright lights flashed before both of them. Officer Ryan smirked. "Guess this is her ride. I wonder if I can get them for some kind of citation, such as trespassing. Or maybe..." The car pulled up. All of the thoughts that Officer Ryan had about this woman quickly dissipated the second he saw the car that pulled up. Bay City Police. He also recognized the car as well. It was the police commissioner's. Immediately, Officer Ryan's face fell. There's no way. She was not related to the commissioner. The door swung open, and soon, a tall, dark-skinned man with a mustache and dark hair cut short stepped out. It was the police commissioner, Michael Barnes. Officer Ryan stood there, the confidence that he felt the second he saw those dark brown eyes on him. He smiled and straightened up in an attempt to save face. "Good evening, Commissioner Barnes." "Babe!" The woman rushed over and embraced her husband. Commissioner Barnes held her tightly. He pulled away, noticing immediately the tears that stained her cheeks. "It's okay, babe. I'm here right now. I'm sorry this happened." It's fine," she said, wiping away the tears. "I'm just so glad that you're here." Tasha could feel Officer Ryan's gaze boring into them. With a chuckle, Officer Ryan gave a half-hearted salute. The sooner he got out of here, the better. This woman was going to tell her husband everything and get him in trouble. He'd worked so darn hard to get to this point that he wasn't going to let this moment ruin his career. The magnitude of the mistake loomed over him as soon as he realized who it was. For Officer Ryan's sake, he needed to save face. He ran to the station, got rid of the body cam footage, and prayed that once the dust settled and tonight was over, nobody made a report. "Good evening to you, Commissioner Barnes. I'll be going now." Officer Ryan slunk away, but before he even took 2 steps, Commissioner Barnes's voice boomed through the air. "Not so fast." Officer Ryan froze in his place. Commissioner Barnes looked him up and down and cocked an eyebrow. "My wife said over the phone that someone was unwilling to help her. Do you know anything about that?" "Oh no, if he finds out, then..." Officer Ryan smiled and shook his head. "I don't know a thing, Commissioner Barnes. I was just in the area and..." "He's lying, babe." Officer Ryan looked at Tasha, who stared at him. Gone was her fearful, worried demeanor. Instead, there was an impassioned look, one that screamed one thing and one thing only, that he messed up. "Why would you say that?" Officer Ryan scoffed. "I do my patrols out here." "You didn't help me. Babe, when my car broke down, I went to see him first, but he dismissed me. He said he couldn't help me and told me to get out of the neighborhood." Damn her. I was about to get away with it too. The smugness Officer Ryan felt having some semblance of power over this woman, and using his influence over her soon dissipated. He didn't know she was the wife of the commissioner, whom he was supposed to see for a promotion at the end of the month. Tasha looked at her husband. She was glad Michael was here, but she didn't want to leave until the truth came out. She had heard from her husband plenty of times about how cops would pretend to be good in order to hide their crimes. He had mentioned to her that he'd been investigating. Now, the fruits of his efforts were right here, apparent as can be. Officer Ryan scoffed. "I would never. I'm an officer of the law and—" "You're wearing your body cam, right, Officer Ryan?" With wide eyes, Officer Ryan nodded. Yes, sir." Michael nodded and extended his hand. "Then allow me to look at it right now. If what my wife is saying is true, then we're going to have a problem." Michael looked at Officer Ryan, who was sweating. The guilt was apparent, but if Michael wanted to pin any crimes or infractions on him, he needed to see the evidence. It was a good thing that he set forth the motion for all officers to wear body cams, even petty security officers. The motion came after some of the recent events and prejudice leveled towards some of the black citizens in the community. The department still had a ways to go before everything was deemed safe for people, but Commissioner Barnes worked every single day to make sure that people were kept safe. Officer Ryan looked around and ran a hand through his blonde hair. "I'm not sure I can do that." "Why? Under code, you're supposed to be wearing it. Are you not wearing it?" "No, that's not it. Let me see the footage. If you refuse to cooperate, I will have to get the department involved. I'll call backup. You and I don't want that, right?" Officer Ryan shook his head. "No, sir. All right, I'll give it to you." With tension, Officer Ryan turned around and unbuttoned the uniform. He grabbed the camera and handed it to Commissioner Barnes, who nodded. "Thank you, Officer Ryan." Michael went back to his car and grabbed the laptop. The evidence was apparent that he had done something. From the moment Commissioner Barnes drove up, he saw pure, abject fear in the man's eyes. The regret was obvious, etched across his face, like some kind of reminder of what he'd done. Sighing, Michael uploaded the footage. There, he saw the interactions between Officer Ryan and his wife. The results only made him angrier. Not only did Officer Ryan not help her, but he said racist and prejudiced things. He planned on arresting her for being on the sidewalk, which, to his knowledge, was a public place. After the first time he drove away, Michael heard all of the racist, heartful things that he uttered, all of which were said about his wife, his pride and joy. Michael loved Tasha and was so appreciative of his wife's dedication to being there for him, even when it wasn't easy. The two of them made it work, even with their long hours and nights at the office. Tasha worked an office job, but it destroyed her. The love for art she had always delighted him, so he pulled some strings and took on more hours so his wife could follow her dreams of being an artist. To see the hurtful words leveled towards her, and the racism that he'd been working to quell right on camera, angered him to no end. His hands shook with fury as he closed the laptop, slamming it down before shaking his head. Michael walked out towards Officer Michael, who stared at both of them. The friendly smile did little to hide the obvious fear Officer Ryan felt. He didn't have time to remove the video footage and doctor it, just like he'd done in the past whenever he did something unsavory. That was why he was considered a good boy in the department. His squeaky clean track record was due to the actions he took to make sure he looked good. But all of his bad actions finally came to light, and the panic only grew worse with each passing second. "Officer Ryan," Michael began as he looked at him, "tell me right now why you refused to help my wife." "I would never. I just thought that—" "You didn't. I saw the interaction. You quickly dismissed her and said things about her that— I can't believe you, Officer Ryan. You're supposed to be a member of the law." I know, sir," he said. Officer Ryan's confidence was soon gone. Michael still couldn't believe that he would do this sort of thing. "Officer Ryan, you've been working with our department for over 5 years now. You're considered one of the best cops in the area. And yet, you do this? It's not like that. I didn't know this. Well, I'm going to have to make some calls. If you leave now, this is fleeing the scene, and it gives me and the rest of the station grounds to arrest and press charges. Officer Ryan gulped. Charges pressed? He was a good guy, yet they treated him like he wasn't. I've had a clean record for over 5 years. I understand, but because of tonight, I'm going to have my team launch an internal investigation in order to shed light on what happened here. Do we have to do it out here? This is a private neighborhood. They'll get upset. Michael didn't care. He knew how these people were. Uppity rich people with more money to spare than they could dream of using. With a shrug, he looked around. Let them be mad. My job is to make sure that the departments run like a tight ship. If one thing is loose, then there will be multiple things lost. Yes. Yes, sir. Michael grabbed his phone and dialed the superintendent's office. Superintendent Mills was at the office when they left. They had recently finished a meeting. Hi there, David. Yes, it's Michael Barnes. There is a situation here. It's involving one of our own, Officer Ryan. Very well, I'll bring him in. Michael hung up and took a deep breath. This was not what he needed after a long day, but with Officer Ryan's actions and abject ignorance of duty, he needed to do something about it. The fact that this was how his wife was treated made one thing apparent. Officer Ryan treated anyone like this as long as they were different from him. Michael walked over and saw Officer Ryan looking directly at him. Officer Ryan, Michael began as he folded his arms across his chest. You're going to be coming with me. I'm still on shift, Officer Ryan replied. This place needs security and... Actually, I think it will be just fine. Ivy Grove has the lowest crime rate. Prior to the implementation of officers, very little ever happened here. We'll send another officer out to take care of this mess. For now, I need you to follow me. Oh, okay, he said. Michael got in his car with Tasha next to him. She sat there wordlessly, feeling both empowered and curious about what her husband might do. It was rare to see Michael like this. He never used a commandeering tone towards her, but was a gentle, sweet man. That was gone, replaced by a guy adamant about justice and getting it delivered regardless of what the yellow tape assumed. He drives back to the station, and when they get out, Michael brings him to his office. Tasha gets out and looks at Michael. He smiled. Wait inside. I'll have Abby take care of you, all right? Okay, Tasha said. Michael was pissed. She knew this side of him. It was a sign nobody wanted to mess with. Officer Ryan was on the brunt of it, and she had a feeling that after tonight, his career of being a hardened cop that was unfair to others would be long gone. Michael walked Officer Ryan over to the interrogation room. He placed Officer Ryan inside, who scoffed. We don't have to do this, Commissioner Barnes. It was a mistake and... So you think refusing to help my wife, allowing your blind prejudice to guide you, and making offhand racist remarks is just a mistake? Officer Ryan didn't respond. The words cut through like a knife, and the regret grew stronger. I'm sorry, I didn't know. If that's how you treated my wife, then I fear what you might do to another person, he stated lowly. Officer Ryan was placed in one of the chairs and strapped down. Why am I being treated like a criminal? It's all a mistake. Because this has gone on long enough, Officer Ryan. Officer Ryan's eyes widened at Michael's mention. Did he know about the falsified body cams? Panic surged through his body, but Officer Ryan kept his mouth shut. As for Michael, he left the holding room and instructed one of the officers to watch over the entrance. The door could only be unlocked by him and Superintendent Mills. He went to David's office and knocked, stepping inside. Superintendent Mills looked up and nodded. You have him? Yes, in the holding area. There is one thing I would like to do first before we do the interview. Sure, what is it? Something about Officer Ryan's words bothered Michael. I need you to get the tech team to look through Officer Ryan's body cam footage. Is there any possibility of erasing the evidence? Superintendent Mills' eyes widened. You think he'd do that? More than likely. Officer Ryan has a clean record. But this incident tonight is a sign that there's something else going on and happening right under our noses. As the head of this police department, I want the truth right there so we can take the correct steps. That makes sense, Superintendent Mills replied, nodding slightly. I'll have the tech team get on it. It's late, but... We have a job to do, Superintendent, Michael said. We can deliver the verdict over the next couple of days. For now, I want an interview done and that body cam evidence in my office. We'll have the decision on Officer Ryan from that. Very well. And I want an internal investigation done on the entirety of the department, Michael snapped. He looked around the place and took a deep breath. Officer Ryan is but one of the many problems. We've been trying to weed it out for so long, but it seems it's not enough. Very well, sir, Superintendent Mills said. I'll get right on that. I'll hold you to it. They walked back to the interrogation room. Commissioner Barnes opened the door and saw Ryan sitting there. In his eyes, regret was hanging in those orbs. Commissioner Barnes felt no remorse for the man. He saw the footage and the fact that he treated his wife like this. Officer Ryan, Commissioner Barnes said, you know Superintendent Mills, right? Of course, he said. He and I are going to have a little chat with you. I want to know what you were thinking and why you decided to blatantly disregard your duty as an officer. Michael's words echoed through the room, calm, yet biting. For Michael, recalling the situation only served to make him angrier. The fact that one of his own, a guy on the department that he trusted with the safety of the people, could do this, infuriated him to no end. Officer Ryan took a deep breath. It's not like that, Commissioner. Really now? So you're telling me that my wife lied? That all of that video evidence was nothing more than a lie? And you're innocent? No, I have the footage. Tell you what, since Mills hasn't seen it, why don't we show him? Panic shrouded Officer Ryan's face. It was one thing to piss off the police commissioner, but another to show the superintendent as well what had been going on. I don't think he needs to see it. But he does. You can't run away from the truth, Officer Ryan. And right now, I think you need to see it for yourself. He popped the body cam footage into the computer and cast it towards a screen. There, Michael saw once more the blatant disregard for her. Superintendent Mills stared at the contents, shocked that Ryan could do such a thing. He thought that Officer Ryan cared about others. It was then that he saw the next part, which was the racism and prejudice clearly leveled towards her. The fury on his face was not like any other, anger that could not be subdued, and abject hate for the man that he trusted. Michael turned off the footage. Deadly silence followed. Officer Ryan looked around, his eyes in a panic as the pupils bounced around the room. Michael folded his arms across his chest and leaned forward. Well? Well, what? Officer Ryan said. It's misrepresentation and... The station wears body cams because we want to provide a safer experience for those that are in our community. The fact that you blatantly disregarded it tells me everything that I need to know about you right now, Officer Ryan. Yes, Superintendent Mills replied, his disappointment apparent as he frowned. This is not a good look, both for the department and you as an officer. The regret festered, growing stronger in the bowels of Officer Ryan's heart. I can assure you it's not like that. I didn't want things to go this way, and... So how did you want them to go then, Officer Ryan? Superintendent Mills asked with an arched brow. Did you think you could get away with this without being discovered? Officer Ryan shook his head. No, it was a mistake. I didn't know what to do about her. I thought she was trespassing. The words spilled from his lips like word vomit, in hopes that one of them might understand. Unfortunately, however, when it comes to horrendous actions of an officer, this one was right there, apparent as can be. Michael sighed and shook his head. Why did you do it? Why did you refuse to help my wife? The question seemed calm, but the fury in Officer Ryan's eyes could kill a man if they wanted to. Officer Ryan bit his lip as he looked down. I didn't know. I thought she'd be fine. But she wasn't. You didn't help her. You know the code. Or did you forget it? Michael pressed a couple of buttons on his keyboard and displayed the code of the police station, numbers etched. The first one at the top showed the mistake. To help others in any time of need and assist the public to improve their well-being. I thought that she was... You thought this because of your own prejudice. I took this position as commissioner in hopes that we could nip this in the bud. This, right here, is exactly what I'm talking about. The racism, which was apparent in the police force, was a weed that Michael wanted to kill. Though a challenge, and it might be impossible to get rid of completely, Michael was more than determined to get this nipped in the bud, once and for all. And here, with Officer Ryan, was the problem. He made Michael look like a mockery of a commissioner who had his own harmful beliefs that propelled him forward. I'm sorry, I made a mistake, Officer Ryan finally spit out. I should have not done that. Should have, would have, could have. I heard these excuses plenty of times, Officer Ryan. Do you think that just because you used the pathetic excuse here, I would be okay with it? Or are you just trying to save your own skin? No, please, it's not like that. Then what is it? He asked pointedly. Is it the regret? Or is it the realization that I and the rest of the department won't take your racism any longer? Officer Ryan sat there, tongue-tied and unable to say anything. Michael's biting words, housed with a fury he hadn't ever seen from someone here in the police force, made the realization of what he'd done that much more obvious. I'm sorry. I don't know what I can do. Michael folded his arms across his chest. Sorry will not cut it there. I'm sorry, but I don't want this type of thinking on the force. For years, I worked to change this place, and that rhetoric is only going to serve to be more harmful. I know, Officer Ryan said. Please don't get rid of me. I'm trying to get a house for my fiancé and me. Michael shrugged. Should have thought about that before saying what you did and refusing to follow the simple rules that we have here. Maybe if you did that. Michael's phone rang and he looked down. Stay with him. It's the tech department. Superintendent Mills nodded, and Michael stepped out. Cupping the phone closer to his ear, he spoke. What did you find? I see. Well, this is certainly one heck of a development. Tell you what, forward it to my email right now. I want you to document everything. I have him in the holding facilities right now. Michael hung up the phone and sighed. He glanced at the clock. It was 2 a.m. All he wanted to do right now was go home and spend time with his wife, not deal with rowdy officers that thought they could do no wrong. But sadly, life had a funny way of working. With a frustrated groan, he trudged back to the office. He opened the door and saw Officer Ryan staring at him. Chewing his lip, he looked down. The regret there. Don't run away, Officer Ryan. You're about to be used as an example for the rest of the team. What do you mean? Michael grabbed the laptop and logged into his account. He clocked on the forwarded information from the tech department. I just got done with a little chat from the tech team. One of them came forth and found it very interesting that there was tons of deleted evidence from your body cam. Almost a week's worth of deleted footage. They told me to look at this, and then to make my decision." Michael pressed the button, and soon more of Officer Ryan's hate appeared before them. Scenes where he refused to help, where he made unsavory remarks and also refused to uphold his duty. Remarks about the way people looked, especially about the color of their skin. He only played 5 minutes of the body cam footage, but that was enough. Michael turned it off and then folded his hands on the table. He leaned forward slightly. "Well, it's not like this, Michael. This body cam footage was deleted. You did a poor job of hiding it, however. Our team found it within the hour." Officer Ryan knew this. He figured that since the rest of the department also hid it, he would get lost in the foray. He was wrong. Please, I don't want to hear your excuses. I just want to know why. Why do you have such a prejudiced outlook? You work with a team of officers all across the spectrum from different walks of life. Was it upbringing or something else? Officer Ryan was about to say something, but then Michael shook his head. "You know what? I don't want to hear it. All the excuses in the world would pale in comparison to the truth that sits right here and something that I cannot ignore any longer." He got up and then turned to Superintendent Mills. "I don't want this guy patrolling. I'm going to put him on paperwork." "Makes sense. I agree. This is not a good look, Officer Ryan." He knew this. Officer Ryan allowed his prejudice and hatred for others that were different cloud his judgment. He thought that he could run away from it, but alas, the past would come to haunt him eventually. "I'm getting one of the team members to take him to one of the holding cells for the night. After that, we'll get him on paperwork in the morning." "I can't leave?" Officer Ryan said, taken aback. He wanted to go home and see his fiancée. That would be the only thing that would help at this point. Michael shook his head. "No. What you did, falsifying your footage, is grounds for litigation. For tonight you'll stay here, and then we'll be put on paperwork until we do a final overview of your behavior." "Then what?" Michael's eyes darkened. "The internal investigation will decide that, but suspension and possible termination are on the table." Officer Ryan felt like he'd been hit in the gut with those words. Michael, calm but furious, turned to the office. When he got out, he gestured toward the doorway and explained that Officer Ryan would be in a holding cell for the night. For Officer Ryan, it felt like his word was crashing down. All the hard work and his training at the police academy culminated to this. Regrets for his actions only grew stronger as the pained realization of his screw-ups became more apparent. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The two officers took him away, and Michael sighed. He rubbed his temples, frustrated that this happened. But knowing that there is such hate spread around the place only served to inspire Michael to focus on his job. That was to be the best commissioner, and to ensure that fairness across the department and towards its citizens was properly enabled. He had a ways to go, and a job to do, but for now, he was glad to have served justice. Anger pulsated through him. Officer Ryan treated Tasha like some kind of animal, subhuman at that. To think that even his own men would do that to her upset him. It only proved that they still had a ways to go before justice and fairness happened across the boards. Tasha, meanwhile, stayed in the break area. It was a staid, boring place, but she at least felt safe here. Abby, the woman working reception, gave her a snack and some tea to help ease her worries. Tasha sat there and drank it quietly, with Abby near the door. "You okay?" "Yeah," Tasha replied, yawning. "Just been one heck of a night." "Believe me, I noticed. I don't think I've ever seen Commissioner Barnes that pissed off. Just what did Officer Ryan do?" "He treated me unfairly, all because of my skin color." Tasha kept her mouth shut, not because she didn't want to tell her, but because she didn't think it was her business to tell this woman. He was rude towards a civilian. I see. Well, that's his problem. Besides, Officer Ryan was part of that group of guys who worked here I never really liked anyway. They were so judgmental. They are. Abby turned to Tasha and smiled, resting a hand on her shoulder. Don't worry. Once Commissioner Barnes is done, you guys can go home. If you want, there's a blanket in the corner if you want some sleep. Thanks, but I'll be all right. A phone charger would be nice, though. Oh, I've got one of those, Abby exclaimed. She walks to her desk and grabbed the items and then brought them back to Tasha. Tasha thanked her and then plugged in her phone. A few seconds later, her phone buzzed and came to life. And then came the texts and calls from Michael. He tried to get a hold of her multiple times throughout the night and mentioned that he was going to be at the office later tonight. She sighed and looked down. He cared so much, but also made sure to focus on his duty too. Without Michael, Tasha didn't know where she'd be. He was a great man and a really good officer. Tasha tried to focus on something else other than what her husband might be doing. As police commissioner, she knew she wasn't allowed to hear about certain stuff. Michael worked a long and tiresome job, with little respect because it was rare for a black man to be in the position he was. Still, she was grateful for everything he did. He made the streets safer and the world fairer. Eventually, footsteps echoed outside. Tasha looked up, a smile crossing her lips as she saw Michael there. He smiled, the stress apparent in his eyes, but relief apparent as soon as he saw her. Tasha got up and rushed over to embrace Michael tightly. Michael pulled away and smiled lovingly at his wife. I'm ready to head out of here. Are you? Of course, Tasha gushed. As much as I like coming here, I'd like to finally get home. Indeed. It's late. They walked towards the doorway, and Tasha stole a glance down the hall. She saw two of the officers holding Officer Ryan in cuffs, bringing him to one of the rooms. Don't worry about that, Michael said, his voice cutting through her thoughts. He's being dealt with. I see. I didn't know what happened after that. Well, we all learned that Officer Ryan was making sure that nobody else found out about what he was doing. He'd been engaging in some less than savory behaviors, which, of course, have since been found. That's good to hear then, Tasha remarked. Sure is. All right, let's get out of here. They left the station, and soon Tasha and Michael got in his car. He turned it on, the engine a low purr that sounded so inviting. Tasha looked out, frowning slightly. Sorry about the car. I thought things were good with it. It's fine. That thing's old anyway. We'll get you another. You don't have to. Babe, please. I can get you some nice things. If nothing else, we can take it to the tow truck come Monday. For now, let's just worry about getting home. Tasha nodded, and the two of them sat in a pleasant silence. Michael turned the corner, and then, as he drove down the street that led to the highway, he spoke. By the way, how did the art fair go? Tasha immediately thought about the money she made and the success of the art fair. For a bit, she forgot all about it. Great, actually. I figured since I didn't see your stuff there. Yeah, I sold it all. Michael whistled. Wow, my baby girl is a seller and is over here making her dreams come true. Because of you, Tasha replied with a smile. I am, though. The sales were a success. I kind of forgot all about it because of everything that happened tonight. Naturally, tonight was interesting to say the least. Even I forgot to ask, especially given recent events. It's fine, she replies. I can focus on that win right now. That's true, and that alone is enough to be happy about. They get on the highway, and as Tasha looks out at the sights before her, something sits at the forefront of her mind. Sighing, she looked at her husband. "Say, babe, what do you think will happen to Officer Ryan? I do appreciate what you did for me." Michael hardened. There were a lot of things that he wished could happen. If the investigation led to a reorganization of the departments, in order to foster an equal and accepting realm, it would be nice. Right now, that's up to the internal investigation. For now, we have banned Officer Ryan from patrols. "Makes sense," she said, nodding. "That might help a little bit. Perhaps, but for now, we're going to look into his behavior. We found through other footage that he'd done this to others, but it went under the radar. That's about all I can tell you." Tasha's eyes widened at the revelation. "So, it wasn't just me then?" Michael shook his head. "No, he had these rotten thoughts and feelings for a long time." "But why?" Michael shrugged. "I wish I knew. Sometimes, however, when people grow up in environments like that, they think it's okay, even when you and I both know it's not." Tasha nodded. Both she and her husband dealt with racism in some regard in the past. While it was rarer these days, the truth was that it was hard for people to get over it. "I know. It is just sometimes hard to understand why anyone would act that way. I don't know. Hate? Jealousy? With people like that, it's hard to tell at times. But the best thing you can do is say something. Hold people accountable for their actions, especially when filled with prejudice." Tasha nodded. "Agreed. I wanted to record what happened when he started acting that way towards me, but couldn't because my phone died." "I understand," Michael said, reaching out and touching his hand. "Don't worry. We have the evidence now. With this, we'll be able to bring him to justice, one way or another." "I know, babe. Thank you for everything. We do need to hold others accountable." "That we do. More are coming forward, but like I've said multiple times, we do have a ways to go." It was the truth. More people are coming forward, telling the world about the hateful words and actions of others. But so few are able to hold it to others and take responsibility for reporting things that aren't okay. Michael saw it a lot in the department. It was why this went under the radar for so long. Sighing, he smiled, and as he turned to the right to pull up to their ranch house, he spoke. "I need to work on it too, to hold others accountable. When we do that, we make the world a better place, however. So I will do my best." Tasha nodded. "Me too." With a smile on both their faces, they made their way to the house, the stress of tonight's situation still hanging over them. But Tasha felt better, and she knew that her husband used his position for justice to be served. Michael was confident that his team would find out the truth and then be able to get the justice that so rightfully needed to be served to Officer Ryan. While Michael hated to use his position for power, this time was one of those situations. He would do it again if he needed to. Officer Ryan sat in his cell. The regret washed over him as he looked forward. "I messed up. My career might be no more." The ticking of the clock only served to make the situation tense for him, especially since he wouldn't know the answer until at least morning. Even then, they might hold off until the time was right, and when they were ready to begin. For Officer Ryan, there was little he could do. The investigation would take place, and he'd have to get up there and pray that the board might give him another chance. But he did feel bad for the way that he treated Tasha, for it was a sign of the hate that he held within himself. Whether this would be enough to make a change or not, only time would tell. For now, he was just stuck in a cell, biding his time in hopes that someday, in some shape or form, he'd make it out. Whether it meant he'd keep his job or not was up to fate. Tasha was able to move on. It was a stressful night, one she remembered fondly. But it was also a night of something else. Of the power that her husband had, and of course, the determination to take care of her. She wanted nothing more than to live a life without anything holding them back. Until the world changed and justice was aptly served, it would take time. But tonight, and the ensuing decisions, would pave the course for this. All she would need to do was wait and see.